The slap came so fast I didn't have time to react. My glasses went flying, shattering on the elegant ballroom floor as 130 guests watched in absolute silence. My cheek burned, but the pain in my chest was far worse. Juliet, my daughter-in-law, had just slapped me on her wedding day because I refused to hand over the keys to my apartment. "That's what you get for being so selfish," she screamed at me in front of everyone. "A woman your age doesn't need so much space." The silence that followed was deafening. No one moved to help me as I crouched down, trembling, to pick up my broken glasses. Some guests looked away, uncomfortable. Others whispered among themselves, but no one, absolutely no one, dared to defend the poor old mother-in-law, who had just been publicly humiliated. My son Ethan stood motionless, his gaze fixed on the floor as if I were invisible. "You're not welcome here anymore," Juliet continued, smoothing her pristine wedding gown. "Ethan and I need our privacy to start our new life. Your apartment would be perfect for us while we shop for something better." Her words were pure venom. For months, I had endured her condescending comments about my worn-out clothes, my old car, my simple life. But this had crossed a line that should never have been touched. I rose slowly, feeling all eyes on me like sharp daggers. Tears streamed down my face, but inside something had changed forever. That slap wasn't just a physical blow. It was the final straw. For years, I had kept a low profile, living with humility and discretion. I had secrets no one, not even my own son, knew. Memories of the last few months began to bombard my mind as I slowly walked toward the exit. I remembered when Juliet first came to my apartment 2 years ago. Her face fell when she saw my modest home, my old furniture, my small kitchen. "Seriously, this is where Ethan's mom lives?" she had asked him, her voice just loud enough for me to hear. From that moment on, every visit had been a silent torture. "Aura, you should move to a smaller place," she had told me 3 months ago during a family dinner. "At your age, you can't maintain such a big apartment. Besides, Ethan and I are thinking of having kids soon. We'll need more space." Her fake smile didn't fool anyone except my son, who seemed to lose his personality whenever she spoke, acting like a puppet on a string. The humiliations had escalated gradually. First, it was the comments about my clothes. "Aurora, don't you have anything more modern to wear?" Then, it was about my car. "That car is so old. It's dangerous for you to drive that." Next, it was my part-time job at the local flower shop. "I don't understand why a woman your age is still working instead of relaxing." Each phrase was a small poison dagger stabbing at my self-esteem. "My name is Aurora Hughes. I am 68 years old, and all my life I have been a woman who prefers discretion over ostentation. I work at a small flower shop 3 days a week. I drive a 10-year-old car. I buy my clothes at discount stores. To the outside world, especially to Juliet, I am just a middle-class widow living on a fixed income. But that's exactly the image I have carefully cultivated for decades. What none of those people looking at me with pity knew was that my life had been completely different before my husband passed. My husband, Robert, had not been the office worker everyone believed. We had made a conscious decision to live modestly, to keep our true wealth a secret, to protect our family's privacy in a way that I now understood had been prophetic. As I walked out of the ballroom, the guests' conversations followed me like a toxic cloud. "Poor thing, she looks so fragile," whispered Juliet's aunt. "The bride is right. That woman can't take care of herself anymore," added Ethan's cousin. "She should be in a retirement home, not living alone." Another guest commented with false compassion. Each word was like acid pouring on open wounds. The cool temperature of the ballroom's air conditioning contrasted sharply with the suffocating heat in my chest. My hands trembled as I fumbled for my cell phone in my worn black purse. A purse I had used for 5 years, not because I couldn't afford a new one, but because I had learned to value practicality over appearances, something my daughter-in-law would clearly never understand. I dialed a number I knew by heart, a number I hadn't used in over a year because I had naively hoped it would never be necessary. "Carlos, it's Aurora. I need you to come to the Royal Oaks Ballroom immediately. Yes, right now. Bring the documents you know about. It's time for them to know the truth. My voice trembled, but there was a firmness in it I hadn't felt in a long time. Are you sure, Mrs. Hughes? Carlos asked with his professional but concerned voice. Once we do this, there's no turning back. I glanced back at the ballroom one last time, where I could see Juliet laughing with her friends, likely telling them how she had put her useless mother-in-law in her place. Ethan was by her side, smiling weakly, showing not a single ounce of remorse for what he had just witnessed. Completely sure, I replied. 30 minutes, Carlos. No more. I hung up the phone and walked toward my car with determined steps. For the first time in years, I was going to drop the mask I had used to protect my family. For the first time, they were going to meet the real Aurora Hughes. And when that happened, when reality hit their perfect fake worlds, they would understand the true meaning of the word regret. The parking lot was quiet, lit by street lights that cast long shadows between the cars. I sat in my old sedan and waited 30 minutes for their lives to change forever. 30 minutes for them to discover they had made the biggest mistake of their lives by humiliating the woman who had secretly been taking care of them more than they could ever imagine. While I waited in my car, memories of how I had reached this moment began to flood my mind like an unstoppable avalanche. It had all started exactly 2.5 years ago when Ethan came to my apartment with that nervous smile. I knew so well from when he was a boy. "Mom, I want you to meet someone very special," he had told me. And there she was, Juliet, with her perfectly styled hair, her designer clothes, and that smile that didn't reach her eyes. From the very first moment, I knew something wasn't right. The way she looked at my apartment, evaluating every corner with thinly veiled disdain, told me everything I needed to know about her intentions. "How cozy," she had murmured as she looked at my second-hand furniture and my sun-faded curtains. Her tone suggested the opposite. Ethan, completely blinded by what he believed was love, didn't notice the condescension in her voice. That first dinner had been a silent disaster. Juliet barely touched the food I had lovingly prepared, claiming she was watching her figure. When I asked her about her family, she gave evasive answers, but not before asking me about my financial situation with a curiosity that I found alarming. "And how do you manage on a widow's pension, Aurora? It must be hard to get by on so little money," she had said with fake concern. What Juliet didn't know was that I had been observing her as much as she had been observing me. Over the next few months, I began to notice patterns that put me on high alert. Every time they visited my apartment, she would make comments about how outdated everything was, about how I deserved something better in my golden years. But her eyes always lingered on the details that really mattered. The prime location of the building, the panoramic view from my balcony, the size of the rooms. One day, while Ethan was in the bathroom, I heard her speaking softly on the phone in my kitchen. "Yes, Mom. His mom's apartment is in a super expensive area. If I can get her to move to a smaller place, we could stay here until we have our own place. She's so naive she'll probably even thank us for helping her with the transition." Her words cut through me like a knife, but I maintained my composure when she returned to the living room, feigning innocence. From that moment on, every interaction with Juliet became a carefully orchestrated performance on both our parts. She played the concerned daughter-in-law, worried about her mother-in-law's well-being, while I pretended to be the vulnerable old woman who needed guidance. But inside, I was gathering information, observing her moves, understanding her true motivations. It was like a game of chess where we both thought we were winning. The following months brought a gradual escalation in her attempts at manipulation. First, there were the subtle suggestions. "Aurora, I've seen some lovely apartments for people your age with all-inclusive services and no maintenance worries." Then came the more direct pressures. "You can't keep living alone at your age. It's dangerous. What if you fall and no one finds out for days?" Each argument was designed to make me feel incompetent and helpless. Ethan, my own son, began to echo the same phrases like a trained parrot. "Mom, Juliet is right. Maybe it would be better for you to consider moving to a more manageable place." Seeing him gradually transform into that woman's puppet was more painful than any direct insult. The son I had raised with so much love and sacrifice now saw me as an obstacle to his happiness. The psychological campaign intensified after they announced their engagement. Visits became more frequent but also more tense. Juliet had started bringing real estate magazines and brochures for senior communities. "I'm just exploring options for you, Aurora. I want to make sure you have the best quality of life possible," she would say, spreading the materials on my coffee table as if it were a business negotiation. But I had been doing my own research. One afternoon, when they went out to run wedding errands, I decided to call an old friend who worked in real estate. "Amelia, I need you to investigate something for me." I told her, "There's a couple who are very interested in my apartment, and I want to know more about their real financial situation." What I discovered chilled me to the bone. Juliet and Ethan were neck-deep in debt. The wedding they were planning cost more than $50,000, completely financed with credit cards and personal loans. The apartment they were renting was on the verge of eviction for non-payment. The luxury cars they drove were financed with payments they couldn't afford. Their lifestyle was a facade built on suffocating debt. Everything started to make sense. The rush to get married, the insistence that I move, the constant comments about my economic vulnerability. It wasn't love that had united this couple. It was the desperate need to find a solution to their financial problems. And my apartment located in one of the most exclusive areas of the city was their lifeline. The revelation hit me like a slap to the soul. My son, the boy I had raised with values of honesty and hard work, had chosen the easy path of manipulation and deceit. He had allowed an ambitious woman to convince him to see his own mother as a resource to be exploited instead of a person to be loved and respected. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, their attempts became more aggressive. "Aura, you can't keep being so selfish," Juliet had said to me just 3 days before the ceremony. "Ethan and I have sacrificed so much for this marriage. The least you can do is help us with housing." Her words no longer even wore the mask of fake concern. It was a direct demand disguised as a family favor. That night, I had made a decision that would change everything. I called Carlos, my financial advisor and the only man I had completely trusted since my husband Robert's death. "Carlos, I need you to prepare some documents. It's possible I'll very soon have to reveal information I've kept secret for years." His voice had become serious immediately. "Mrs. Hughes, are you sure this is the right time?" He had warned me with the wisdom of someone who had handled my affairs for more than a decade. "Once this information is public, you can't take it back. The consequences could be devastating for family relationships." But I had already made up my mind. The family I had tried to protect with my silence had chosen to betray me. And now, sitting in my car in the ballroom parking lot, waiting for Carlos to arrive with the documents that would change everything, I realized the moment of truth had come. 25 more minutes and Juliet, Ethan, and all those guests who had looked at me with pity would discover who Aurora Hughes really was. 25 more minutes and their perfect worlds built on lies and greed would crumble like sand castles. The night breeze rustled the tree leaves around the parking lot, creating dancing shadows under the lights. It was strangely poetic that on such a beautiful night, so many illusions were about to die forever. 20 minutes had passed since my call to Carlos, and every second felt like an eternity. From my car, I could see the golden lights of the ballroom, hear the cheerful music and laughter spilling out of the open windows. It was surreal to think that in just a few minutes, that celebration would turn into a nightmare for the main players. I closed my eyes and let the most painful memories of the last few months flood my mind. I needed to remember exactly why I had reached this point of no return. The biggest humiliation had happened just 2 weeks before the wedding during what Juliet had called an important family meeting. She had arrived at my apartment, accompanied not only by Ethan, but also by her parents, a perfectly planned ambush. "Aurora, we want to talk to you about your future." Juliet's mother, an haughty woman who looked at me as if I were a bothersome insect, had begun. "We believe it's time for you to make responsible decisions about your life," continued Juliet's father, a burly man who had surveyed my apartment with the eyes of an appraiser evaluating a property. "At your age, living alone in such a big place is not only unnecessary, but dangerous. What if you have a medical emergency and no one finds out for days? Their words were rehearsed, too perfect to be spontaneous. Ethan had remained silent throughout the conversation, nodding occasionally like a well-trained puppet. Seeing him there, sitting next to a family that treated me like an obstacle, was like watching the son I had raised die before my eyes. "Mom," he finally said in a voice I no longer recognized. "They are right. Juliet and I have been talking, and we think it would be better for everyone if you moved to a place more appropriate for your age." "Appropriate for my age," I repeated, feeling the anger begin to boil inside me. "And who gets to decide what's appropriate for me?" "You." Juliet's mother exchanged a knowing look with her husband, as if my words confirmed something they had already discussed. "Aurora, we understand this can be difficult to accept, but you must think about what's best for Ethan and Juliet." "What's best for them?" I murmured, beginning to understand the true dimension of the conspiracy that had been woven behind my back. "And I suppose my apartment would be perfect for them to start their married life, right?" The awkward silence that followed my question was all the answer I needed. They had planned every detail of this conversation, every argument, every psychological pressure. Juliet took control at that moment, deploying her full arsenal of emotional manipulation. "Aurora, it's not just about the apartment, it's about your well-being. We've been doing research, and we found a wonderful residence for people your age. It has 24-hour medical services, social activities, prepared meals. You could make friends with people who understand what you're going through." Her fake smile made me nauseous. "What I'm going through?" I asked, finding confusion. "And what exactly do you think I'm going through, Juliet?" She looked at Ethan for support before answering. "Well, loneliness. Financial uncertainty, the fear of not being able to take care of yourself. It's normal at your age, Aurora. You don't have to be ashamed of needing help." The audacity of this 28-year-old woman telling me what was normal at my age left me speechless for a moment. But then I saw something in her eyes that chilled me. The absolute certainty that she had a right to my life, my home, my decisions. To her, I was no longer a person with autonomy, but an obstacle to be removed with as little resistance as possible. "We've run the numbers," Juliet's father continued, pulling out a folder they had clearly prepared in advance. "The cost of the residence would be approximately $2,500 a month. With the sale of your apartment, you'd have enough money to cover it for many years, and there would still be some left over to help Ethan and Juliet with their initial marriage expenses." There it was, the naked raw truth. It wasn't about my well-being or my safety. It was about money. It was about converting my home into cash to finance their unsustainable lifestyle. "And if I refuse?" I asked, although I already knew the answer. "Aurora," Ethan said, his voice sounding rehearsed. "We hope it won't be necessary to take more drastic measures. But if your mental health deteriorates to the point that you can't make rational decisions," the implicit threat was crystal clear. "If I didn't cooperate voluntarily, they would seek legal ways to declare me incompetent." They had done their research. They had planned. They had prepared the ground to take everything I owned by force if necessary. The son I had raised with so much love was sitting right there, allowing strangers to threaten his own mother. That night, after they left with my firm refusal, I cried for the first time in years, not out of sadness, but for the definitive death of the illusions I had held about my family. I had called Carlos. Immediately. "I need you to investigate something urgently," I had told him through tears. "I want to know exactly what the real financial situation is for my son and his fiancée. Everything. Debts, income, liabilities, everything." The results of that investigation had been devastating. Ethan earned $45,000 annually as a sales manager, but had debts of more than $80,000 on credit cards. Juliet worked part-time as an image consultant, making maybe $4,000 a year, but spent as if she had an executive salary. Together, they owed more than $120,000, not counting the loans they had taken out for the wedding. The apartment they rented for $2,000 a month was 3 months behind on payments. The cars they drove were financed with payments that took up 60% of their combined income. Their main credit card was maxed out and they had started using cash advances to pay other debts. They were in a financial free-fall and my apartment represented their only hope of salvation. But there was something else in Carlos's report that had completely broken my heart. For the past 6 months, Ethan had been regularly calling banks and insurance companies asking about loans against his elderly mother's property. He had been asking about legal procedures to obtain financial power of attorney over senior citizens. My own son had been planning my systematic dispossession for months. The most painful information had come at the end of the report. According to a private investigator Carlos had hired, Juliet had been telling her friends that she had sacrificed herself by getting engaged to an older, less attractive man because his mother had valuable properties and no competitive heirs. To her, marrying Ethan wasn't love. It was a strategic investment in my estate. That revelation had been the final straw. For weeks, I had considered simply revealing my true financial situation to them, thinking that maybe the shock would make them reconsider their behavior. But after reading that report, I understood that it wasn't about money or desperation. It was about a pure, calculated greed that had corrupted my son until he was unrecognizable. The days leading up to the wedding had been torture. Every phone call from Ethan was a new pressure to reconsider my position. Every visit from Juliet included poisonous comments about my stubbornness and selfishness. They had started to treat me as if I were already a senile old woman whose opinions didn't matter. The night before the wedding, Ethan had made his last attempt. "Mom, tomorrow is the most important day of my life. Please don't ruin it by being difficult. Juliet just wants what's best for all of us." His words had been the final confirmation that I had lost my son forever. The man who was getting married the next day was no longer the boy I had raised with so much love and sacrifice. And now sitting in my car waiting for Carlos, I realized that everything had led to this inevitable moment. It wasn't about revenge or cruelty. It was about justice. It was about showing them the consequences of their actions. It was about teaching them that some lines should never have been crossed. 15 more minutes and everything would change forever. My hands trembled as I dialed the number for Joseph, my neighbor from the apartment next door, a 70-year-old man who had been a silent witness to all the tense visits of the last few months. "Joseph, it's Aurora. I need to ask you for a very important favor," I said, my voice shaking. "Could you go to my apartment and bring me the brown folder from the second drawer of my desk?" "Yes, right now. It's urgent." Joseph had been like a brother to me since Robert passed away, and I knew I could trust him without him asking questions. While I waited, I remembered the conversation I had with Joseph just a week earlier. He had witnessed from his balcony when Juliet arrived with a real estate appraiser without notifying me. "Aurora, that girl brought a man with a briefcase who was measuring your apartment from the outside." He had told me with obvious concern in his voice. "When they saw me, they left. Quickly. I don't like what's happening at all." Joseph had been the first to notice the subtle changes in Ethan's behavior over the last few months. "Your son doesn't greet me like he used to," he had observed. "He used to stay and chat with me when he came to visit. Now he rushes in and out as if he's ashamed of something." His words had confirmed what my heart already knew. I had lost my son long before the slap that night. The folder I had asked Joseph for contained documents no one in my family had ever seen. Bank certificates, property titles, investment records that Robert and I had kept secret for decades. Documents that proved the poor widow living on a modest pension was actually a woman with enough resources to change lives with a single decision. 10 minutes later, Joseph appeared in the parking lot with the folder in his hands. "Aura, what's going on? You look very upset," he asked as he handed me the documents. "It has to do with Ethan's wedding." I explained briefly what had happened in the ballroom, and I saw his face harden with every detail. "That woman is a viper," he muttered. "I always knew it." "Joseph, in a few minutes, a man named Carlos will arrive. When you see him, tell him I'm waiting for him here," I asked. "And Joseph, after tonight, many things are going to change. I want you to know you have always been like family to me. His eyes filled with tears as he nodded. You're family to me, too, Aurora. Do what you have to do. As Joseph returned to the building, I opened the folder and began to review documents I hadn't looked at in months. The first was a bank statement showing a balance of $5,400,000 in an investment account. The second was the property title for a downtown office building that generated monthly rent of $50,000. The third was the deed to a beach house I had bought as an investment 10 years ago. Robert had been a genius at investments, starting with a small import business and turning it into a silent empire. Together, we had made the decision to live modestly to protect our privacy and our family security. Visible wealth attracts problems. Robert used to say, invisible wealth gives you power. I never imagined I would have to use that power against my own son. Each document in that folder represented years of hard work and smart decisions. The flower shop where I worked 3 days a week wasn't because I needed the money, but because I liked to stay active and connected to the community. The old car I drove wasn't due to economic limitations, but because I had learned that unnecessary ostentation only brings problems. My apartment, the one Juliet so coveted, was actually the least valuable property in my portfolio. I had bought it not for its economic value, but for the memories it held. It was where Robert and I had spent our last years together, where we had planned our future, where he had passed away in my arms after a brave battle with cancer. But there was something else in that folder that would change everything for Ethan and Juliet. For the last 3 years, since my son had started having financial problems, I had been secretly paying many of his debts. The credit card payments he thought came from a work bonus were actually coming out of my account. The special discount on his rent that he had negotiated with his landlord was money I transferred monthly. Without Ethan knowing, I had been subsidizing his irresponsible lifestyle for years. The luxurious apartment he lived in, the car he drove, even some of the expenses for the wedding that was taking place at that very moment had been made possible by my secret financial support. I had thought I was helping my son through a difficult time, not realizing I was financing his transformation into a person I didn't recognize. The bank records showed monthly transfers totaling $4,500 that had kept the sinking ship of Ethan's financial life afloat. Money he thought came from work bonuses or tax refunds when in reality it was his mother desperately trying to protect him from the consequences of his irresponsible decisions. The irony was devastating. While Juliet was humiliating me for being an economic burden on their future marriage, I was literally the only reason they could afford that marriage. While they were planning to strip me of my apartment to solve their financial problems, I had been solving those problems in secret for years. I closed the folder and looked toward the ballroom once more. The lights were still shining. The music was still playing. The guests were still celebrating. But in less than 5 minutes, Carlos would arrive with the final documents I needed. In less than 5 minutes, the process of cutting all the financial threads I had used to protect a son who had chosen to betray me would begin. This is not revenge, I reminded myself. This is justice. This is about teaching them that actions have consequences, that greed has a price, that family is not something you can sell for economic convenience. I had tried to protect Ethan from reality for too long, and that protection had corrupted him until he was unrecognizable. Headlights of a car approached the parking lot, illuminating the night with a white light that momentarily blinded me. It was Carlos, punctual as always, arriving with the documents that would change everything forever. I got out of my car and walked toward him, feeling how each step took me further away from the Aurora I had been, and closer to the woman I needed to become. Mrs. Hughes, Carlos said as he got out of his car, a legal brief under his arm. Are you completely sure about this? Once we go in there will be no way to undo what is about to happen. I looked toward the ballroom one last time, where my son and his new wife were probably still celebrating their victory over the useless old woman they had just humiliated. I have never been more sure of something in my life, Carlos. It's time for them to meet the real Aurora Hughes. Carlos opened his folder under the parking lot light and began to show me the documents he had prepared with his characteristic efficiency. Mrs. Hughes, here is the order for the immediate suspension of all bank transfers you have been making in Ethan Hughes's name, he said, pointing to the first paper. Also, here is the notice of cancellation of the lease agreement that you had confidentially guaranteed. The landlord will receive this document tomorrow morning. I took the papers with trembling but determined hands. Each document represented a thread that I had carefully woven for years to protect my son. And now I was cutting those threads one by one. And the payment for the ballroom? I asked, although I already knew the answer. Cancelled? Carlos confirmed. The deposit you had guaranteed will be withdrawn tonight. They will have until tomorrow to find an alternative form of payment. The magnitude of what I was about to do hit me like a cold wave. For 3 years, I had been the invisible safety net that had kept Ethan and Juliet's lives afloat. The apartment they lived in, the car he drove, even the wedding that was taking place at that very moment had all been made possible by my secret financial support. And now, in a single night, I was going to withdraw all that support definitively. Carlos, I want you to understand something, I said to him as I signed each document with a determination I hadn't felt in years. This is not cruelty or revenge. This is the only way for them to learn the real value of things. For too long I protected them from the consequences of their actions, and that protection corrupted them into people I don't recognize. I understand perfectly, Mrs. Hughes, Carlos replied with genuine respect in his voice. In my 30 years as a financial advisor, I have seen many families destroyed by greed and ingratitude. What you are doing requires more courage than most people possess. His words gave me the final strength I needed to take the last step. We walked together toward the ballroom entrance, and with each step, I could feel my heart beating faster. It wasn't nervousness I felt. It was a strange mix of sadness for what I had lost, and anticipation for what I was about to regain, my dignity, my self-respect, my right to be treated as a human being instead of as a resource to be exploited. The music stopped abruptly when we entered the ballroom. 130 pairs of eyes turned toward us, and I could see the confusion on the guests' faces. Some recognized Carlos immediately. After all, he had handled the financial affairs of several prominent families in the city for decades. His presence at social events usually meant that something important was about to happen. Juliet was the first to react. "What are you doing here, Aurora?" she shouted at me from the center of the dance floor where she had been posing for photos with Ethan. "You already left once. Wasn't that enough drama for one night?" Her voice carried that arrogance I had come to know so well, but I could detect a note of nervousness that hadn't been there before. "Ladies and gentlemen," Carlos said in a clear, professional voice, "I apologize for interrupting this celebration, but I have urgent legal matters to discuss with Mr. Ethan Hughes and Mrs. Juliet Dawson." The silence that followed was so deep you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Some guests began to pull out their cell phones, sensing they were about to witness something extraordinary. Ethan slowly approached, his face pale and his eyes full of confusion. "What's going on here, Mom?" he asked me in a voice that no longer sounded as confident as it had when he had humiliated me just minutes before. "Who is this man, and why is he talking about legal matters?" I could see his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his tie, a nervous gesture he had had since childhood. "Ethan," I said in a voice firmer than it had sounded in months. "This is Carlos Jones, my financial and legal advisor. He has come to deliver some documents that I think you will find very enlightening." Carlos opened his folder and took out the first document. "Mr. Ethan Hughes, you are hereby notified that the financial guarantee your mother had provided for your lease agreement has been immediately cancelled. Your landlord will be notified tomorrow morning, and you will have 30 days to find a new guarantor or vacate the property." All the color drained from Ethan's face. "Financial guarantee," he murmured, looking at me with eyes that were beginning to fill with comprehension and horror. "Mom, what is he talking about?" But I could see from his expression that a part of him already knew. For years, he had suspected that his financial luck wasn't completely natural, but he had chosen not to ask questions because the answers might have been uncomfortable. "Also," Carlos continued relentlessly, "the monthly transfers of $4,500 that your mother had been making to your personal accounts have been permanently suspended. This includes payments for credit cards, car insurance, and various other expenses that you believed were being covered by other sources." Juliet let out a gasp that echoed throughout the ballroom. "That's impossible," she exclaimed, running toward us, her wedding dress dragging on the floor. Ethan doesn't have a rich mother. Look how she lives. Look at her clothes, her car. She's an old woman living on a miserable pension. Her hysteria was evident, and several guests began to murmur among themselves with increasing fascination. Finally, Carlos said, taking the last document from his folder, the guaranteed payment for this celebration has also been cancelled. The ballroom management will have the right to demand full payment before guests can leave tonight. His words fell on the ballroom like a bomb, and I could see some guests nervously begin to move toward the exits. The realization hit Ethan like a hammer. "You," he muttered, looking at me with eyes that couldn't fully process what they were hearing. "You've been. All this time. You've been paying for everything." His voice broke on the last word, and for a moment, I saw the small boy he had once been, vulnerable and confused. "For 3 years, Ethan," I confirmed in a voice that sounded strangely calm after the emotional storm I had been living through. 3 years in which I thought I was helping you get through a difficult time. 3 years in which I believed you would eventually recover and become the man I raised. 3 years in which I hoped you would remember the values I taught you. Juliet began to pace in circles, clutching her head with increasing desperation. "This can't be happening. This can't be real." She screamed as the guests watched her with a mix of horror and morbid fascination. "You're a poor old woman. You work at a flower shop. You drive a 10-year-old car. You can't have money." "Appearances are deceiving, Juliet," I said finally, feeling decades of careful performance come to an end. "For years, I chose to live simply because my husband and I believed that visible wealth attracts problems. It turns out we were right. It's just that the problems came from where we least expected them." The music had stopped completely, and the only sound in the ballroom was the agitated breathing of the newlyweds and the growing murmurs of the guests, who were beginning to understand that they were witnessing something completely unexpected. Some were already recording with their phones, instinctively knowing that this story would become urban legend. "Mom," Ethan said, his voice broken. "Please, there has to be some way to fix this. The wedding, the guests, everything." But I could see in his eyes that he was finally beginning to understand the magnitude of what he had lost, not just money or financial support. He had lost his mother, the woman who had loved him unconditionally for 35 years. "The only way to fix this, Ethan," I replied, "was not to break it in the first place." The silence in the ballroom became deafening. 130 guests held their breath as they processed what they had just heard. Juliet stood motionless for the first time all night, her eyes darting between Carlos, the documents, and my face, as if trying to find a crack in the reality that was collapsing around her. Ethan just stared at me with an expression I will never forget, a mixture of shock, belated comprehension, and absolute horror. "Mrs. Hughes," Carlos said in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Would you like me to proceed with reading the full financial details?" His question hung in the air like a sword over the newlyweds' heads. I could see several guests moving closer, fascinated by the drama unfolding before their eyes. "Please, Carlos," I replied with a serenity I didn't know I possessed. "I think everyone deserves to know the full truth." Juliet tried to interrupt with a desperate shriek, but Carlos raised a hand and continued with the precision of a surgeon performing a delicate operation. Over the last 36 months, Carlos began consulting his documents. "Mrs. Aurora Hughes has transferred a total of $162,000 to cover the living expenses of her son, Ethan Hughes, and his fiancée. This includes $48,000 for rent payments, $44,000 for credit card payments, $18,000 for vehicle insurance, and $22,000 for miscellaneous expenses." A collective murmur swept through the ballroom. Some guests exchanged glances of astonishment. Others pulled out calculators on their phones to verify the figures. Juliet's mother, who had remained seated at the head table throughout the confrontation, slowly stood up, her face completely pale. Furthermore, Carlos continued relentlessly, "Mrs. Hughes personally guaranteed the total cost of this celebration, including the ballroom, food, music, flowers, and photography, for an amount of $53,000. Money which, as I mentioned earlier, is no longer available to cover these expenses." Juliet finally found her voice, but what came out was more of a wail than coherent words. This is impossible. It's a lie. No one can have so much money and live like a pauper. She turned to the guests as if looking for support, but found only fascinated faces, and some who were clearly amused by her desperation. My dear Juliet, I said with a calm that contrasted dramatically with her hysteria. You have just learned a very valuable lesson about judging people by appearances. For years, I chose to live simply because my husband, Robert, and I valued privacy above ostentation. It turned out to be a very wise decision. Ethan finally reacted, approaching me with hesitant steps. Mom, please, there has to be an explanation. There has to be a way to resolve this. You can't destroy my life like this. His voice broke on the last word, and for a moment I felt a pang of maternal pain that almost made me waver. Destroy your life? I repeated, feeling the anger begin to boil inside me again. I'm destroying your life. Wasn't it your wife who slapped me in front of 130 people? Wasn't it you who stood by without saying a word while I was being humiliated? Wasn't it you who planned to strip me of my home? The truth of my words resonated in the ballroom like church bells. Several guests nodded, clearly remembering the scene that had started all this drama. Some even had videos on their phones of the slap Juliet had given me, digital evidence of the cruelty that had triggered this revelation. But that was different, Ethan muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. We didn't know. We didn't understand. We thought you really needed help. His excuses sounded pathetic even to himself, and I could see some guests exchanging looks of contempt. You didn't know? I asked, my voice rising for the first time all night. You didn't know you were planning a family ambush to pressure me into selling my home. You didn't know you had brought a real estate appraiser without my knowledge. You didn't know you had been investigating legal ways to declare me incompetent if I didn't cooperate. With each question, Ethan's posture shrank. Carlos took advantage of the moment to pull another document from his folder. Mr. Hughes, I must also inform you that your mother has decided to amend her will. All assets that were previously designated for you to inherit have been redirected to charities dedicated to protecting seniors from family abuse. The impact of this declaration was like a silent explosion. Juliet staggered backward as if she had been physically hit. You can't do that! She shrieked, her mask of composure finally falling completely. We are your family. Ethan is your only son. You can't disinherit him over a stupid fight. A stupid fight? I repeated, letting the words hang in the tension-filled air. Is that how you describe a family conspiracy to strip an old woman of her home? Is that how you justify slapping your husband's mother on her own wedding day? My voice had turned icy, and I could see some guests flinch. Juliet's father, who had remained silent throughout the confrontation, finally approached with an expression of poorly disguised panic. Mrs. Hughes, I think we are all a little upset by the emotions of the day. Maybe we could discuss this in private when things have calmed down a bit. His tone was that of a man who had just realized he had bet on the wrong horse. There's nothing to discuss in private, I replied firmly. Everything I had to say has been said here in front of the same people who witnessed my humiliation. You chose to make this public, so my response will be public. The guests' heads moved between us as if watching a tennis match, absorbed in every exchange. Carlos closed his folder with a dry snap that echoed throughout the ballroom. Mrs. Hughes, all documents have been delivered and explained. The legal effects will begin immediately. He turned to Ethan and Juliet with a professional expression, but not without a certain satisfaction. I suggest you contact your own legal and financial advisors as soon as possible. Juliet finally collapsed. She literally dropped into a nearby chair and began to cry with uncontrolled sobs that echoed through the ballroom. Everything is ruined, she murmured through her tears. Everything we planned, everything we worked for. It's all destroyed. Her wedding dress, once immaculate, was now wrinkled and stained with tears. No, I said, approaching her for the first time since the slap. What's destroyed are the lies, the greed, and the lack of respect. What's destroyed is the illusion that you can treat people like objects and expect there to be no consequences. I stopped in front of her, forcing her to look up. This is what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness. Ethan went to his wife and placed a trembling hand on her shoulder. Juliet, we have to find a way to fix this. There has to be something we can do. But even as he spoke, I could see in his eyes that he knew it was too late. Some bridges once burned cannot be rebuilt. There is a way to fix this, Ethan, I said, looking him directly in the eyes for the first time in months without feeling pain. You can learn from this. You can grow from this. You can become the people I hoped you would be before greed corrupted you. My voice softened slightly because despite everything, he was still my son. But that growth will have to happen without my financial help, without my apartment, and without my inheritance. You will have to do it the hard way like everyone else does. The ballroom remained in absolute silence, every person present knowing that they were witnessing the definitive end of a family relationship. Carlos and I headed toward the exit, leaving behind a ballroom full of shocked guests and a newlywed couple whose perfect world had collapsed in less than 30 minutes. As Carlos and I walked toward the exit, the silence behind us was interrupted by a voice I didn't expect to hear. Wait, Aurora. It was Lucy, Ethan's younger sister, who had been sitting at a table in the back throughout the confrontation. She ran toward us with tears in her eyes and an expression of absolute horror on her face. Aunt Aurora, Lucy said in a trembling voice. I didn't know anything about this. I swear Ethan never told me what they were planning with you. Lucy had always been my favorite niece, a 29-year-old who worked as a teacher and had maintained a close relationship with me even after Ethan had distanced himself. If I had known what they were going to do to you, I would have tried to stop them. I stopped and looked at her, seeing in her eyes the same honesty I had known since she was a little girl. I know, Lucy, I said softly, placing a hand on her cheek. You have always been different. You've never seen people as opportunities or resources to be exploited. Her tears fell harder as she nodded, clearly devastated by her brother's actions. But why did you never tell us about the money? Lucy asked with genuine confusion. Why did you keep all this a secret for so many years? It was a question that deserved an honest answer, especially coming from someone who had always treated me with respect and genuine love. Because your Uncle Robert and I learned a long time ago that money changes people, I explained as some guests discreetly moved closer to listen. We have seen families destroyed by inheritances, friendships ended by loans, and children who see their parents as walking pensions. We decided to live simply to protect the relationships that really mattered. Lucy nodded slowly, beginning to understand the wisdom behind my decisions. But Ethan, he was different before. When we were kids, he would have defended anyone who hurt you. What happened to him? Her question contained all the pain of a sister who had watched her brother transform into someone unrecognizable. What happened to him was Juliet, I replied with sadness, but without bitterness. What happened to him was greed disguised as love, ambition without values, and me in my effort to protect him, depriving him of the chance to learn important lessons about responsibility and consequences. My answer resonated through the ballroom where the guests were still engrossed in every word. Carlos had respectfully stayed to the side during this exchange, but now he approached and murmured something in my ear. Mrs. Hughes, the ballroom manager, is approaching. It seems he's already found out about the cancellation of the guaranteed payment. Indeed, I could see a burly man in a suit walking toward us with several papers in his hands and a very serious expression. Mrs. Hughes, the manager said in a tense voice, I just received a payment cancellation notice that is highly irregular. The contract for this celebration is guaranteed until tomorrow morning. Can you explain what's happening here? His presence added a new layer of immediate reality to the crisis I had just triggered. Mr. Martinez, I replied, remembering his name from the conversations we had when I secretly arranged the wedding payment. The financial guarantee I provided for this celebration has been revoked due to extraordinary circumstances that have come to light tonight. I gestured toward Ethan and Juliet, who remained in the center of the ballroom like statues of despair. I understand, Martinez said, looking at the scene with the experience of someone who had handled social events for decades. And who will be responsible for the payment now? The total outstanding amount is $53,000, including the ballroom, food, music, flowers, and photography services. His voice was professional but firm, making it clear that someone would have to solve this problem immediately. Ethan finally reacted, approaching us with hesitant steps. "Mr. Martinez, there must be some misunderstanding. My mom, she can't just cancel the payment like that. We are family. This can be resolved." His voice carried a desperation I had never heard before. The desperation of a man who finally understood the magnitude of his situation. "Young man," Martinez said with the forced patience of a professional. "The financial guarantee was provided by Mrs. Hughes personally and privately. She has the legal right to withdraw that guarantee at any time. I now need someone to provide an alternative form of payment immediately, or I will be forced to suspend the event." Juliet approached, stumbling, her wedding dress now completely disheveled and her makeup smeared with tears. "You can't do this," she yelled at Martinez. "It's our wedding day. You can't ruin our wedding day over money problems." Her hysteria was evident, and several guests began to murmur among themselves with increasing discomfort. Martinez replied with growing firmness, "I am not ruining anything. I am simply following the contractual terms that you signed. If you cannot provide an alternative payment immediately, I will have to ask all guests to leave and suspend all services." His ultimatum fell on the ballroom like a final sentence. The reality of the situation began to penetrate the minds of the guests. Some had already started to grab their bags and discreetly head for the exits. Others remained fascinated by the drama that continued to unfold, like spectators of a traffic accident they couldn't look away from. "Mom," Ethan said, approaching me with tears in his eyes for the first time since he was a child. "Please, I know what we did was wrong. I know we hurt you, but there are 130 people here. There are photos. There are memories. You can't destroy all this over a fight." His voice broke on the last word, and for a moment, I saw the little boy he had once been. "Ethan," I replied with a calm that surprised me. "I am not destroying anything. You destroyed this when you chose greed over love. When you chose manipulation over honesty. When you chose to publicly humiliate me instead of treating me with the respect I deserve as your mother." Each word was like a dagger. But they were words that needed to be said. "But what are we going to do?" Juliet asked in a desperate voice, looking at the guests who continued to leave the ballroom. "How are we going to explain this? How are we going to pay for all of this?" Her panic was evident, and I could see she was finally starting to understand the real implications of her actions. "You're going to do what all responsible people do," I replied. "You're going to find ways to earn money honestly. You're going to learn to live within your means. You're going to discover what it means to work hard for the things you want instead of expecting others to provide them for you." My voice had grown stronger, and I could feel decades of accumulated wisdom pouring out through my words. Carlos approached discreetly and murmured, "Mrs. Hughes, the legal process is complete. All documents have been delivered," and explained. "There is nothing more we can do here." His message was clear. It was time to leave, to let Ethan and Juliet face the consequences of their decisions without my presence as a distraction. Lucy approached once more and hugged me tightly. "Aunt Aurora, I want you to know that you will always have my respect and my love, no matter what happens with Ethan." Her words were like a balm for my wounded heart, reminding me that not all family had been corrupted by greed. "And you will always have mine, Lucy," I replied, returning the hug. "Remember this night when you make important decisions in your life. Remember that character is defined not by what we have, but by how we treat the people we love." Her tears soaked my shoulder as she nodded, completely understanding the lesson that was unfolding before her eyes. Martinez approached again, this time with greater urgency. "Ladies and gentlemen, I need an immediate resolution. I have other commitments tonight and I cannot keep staff here indefinitely without a guarantee of payment." His professional patience was finally running out, adding additional pressure to an already desperate situation. "You have my phone number," I said to Ethan. "And Juliet for the last time. When you are ready to have a real conversation about respect, values, and responsibility, when you have learned what it means to earn things for yourselves, when you can look me in the eye and offer me a genuine apology for what you did to me tonight, then we can talk. But for that, I added, looking at them directly, first you will have to find a way to solve the mess you created here all on your own. With those words, I turned and walked toward the exit with Carlos, leaving behind a ballroom full of chaos, despair, and the harsh reality of deserved consequences. 3 days after the wedding, my apartment had become a refuge of peace I hadn't experienced in years. Joseph had come over every morning with coffee and pastries from the local bakery, making sure I was okay after what he called the night Aurora reclaimed her dignity. His visits had been a balm for my soul, reminding me that I still had chosen family who valued me for who I truly was. The phone had rung incessantly for these 3 days. Ethan had called 37 times, leaving messages that evolved from initial anger to desperate pleading. Juliet had sent 14 text messages, each more hysterical than the last. Her parents had shown up at my door twice, demanding that I fix the mess I had caused, but I had held my ground with a calmness that surprised even myself. Carlos arrived that morning with news that, while expected, was devastating in its full scope. Mrs. Hughes, he had told me as we drank tea on my balcony. I have received reports from all fronts. Ethan and Juliet were evicted from their apartment yesterday morning. The ballroom has initiated legal proceedings to recover the $53,000 owed. Their credit cards have been cancelled for non-payment. And where are they living now? I had asked, although a part of me already knew the answer. With Juliet's parents, Carlos replied. Apparently, it's a 2-bedroom apartment where 3 people already live. The situation is tense, according to my sources. His expression suggested that tense was a very conservative description of reality. That afternoon, while I was watering my plants on the balcony, I saw a familiar car park in front of the building. It was Lucy, but this time she wasn't alone. With her was Amelia, my old friend from the real estate sector. And to my surprise, Joseph got out of the back seat. Aura! Lucy yelled from the sidewalk. We need to talk to you. There are things you need to know. When they arrived at my apartment, their faces wore a mixture of urgency and concern that immediately put me on alert. At Aurora, Lucy began, I've been investigating some things since the wedding night. Things I think you need to know before it's too late. She sat on my couch with a folder in her hands that looked as official as the one Carlos had carried to the ballroom. Too late for what? I asked, pouring her some tea while trying to stay calm. Amelia cleared her throat and spoke for the first time. Aurora, for the last 3 days, I've been doing some digging into Ethan and Juliet's financial situation. What I found goes beyond what any of us imagined. They had been planning this for more than a year, Amelia continued, opening the folder to reveal documents that made me feel sick to my stomach. I found evidence that Juliet had been consulting with lawyers specializing in mental competency cases for seniors. They had a detailed plan to legally declare you incompetent and gain control over all your properties. Joseph, who had remained silent until then, leaned forward with a grave expression. Aurora, there's more. That night after you left the ballroom, I overheard Juliet talking on the phone with someone. She was saying that the old woman had ruined everything, but they still had Plan B. His words sent a shiver down my spine. Plan B? I repeated, feeling my stomach clench with a mixture of fear and anger. Lucy took my hand and squeezed it gently. Aunt Aurora, they've been telling everyone you've gone senile, that the scene at the wedding was evidence that you've lost touch with reality. They're building a case for a judge to declare that you can't handle your own affairs. The magnitude of their betrayal expanded before me like an infected wound. It wasn't enough to have publicly humiliated me, to have planned to strip me of my home, to have conspired against me for months. Now they were trying to use my justified response to their cruelty as evidence of mental incompetence. It was a wickedness that surpassed anything I had imagined possible. But that's not all, Amelia added, her voice trembling. I've discovered that Juliet has been spreading rumors in the neighborhood about your erratic behavior. She has visited several of your neighbors, suggesting that they should report anything concerning they observe about you. The systematic nature of her defamation campaign left me breathless. Carlos, who had returned for our scheduled meeting, entered the apartment at that moment and found the atmosphere thick with tension. "Mrs. Hughes, I see you've already found out about some of the recent maneuvers." His expression was more serious than I had ever seen it. "I have some additional news that confirms what your friends have discovered." "Ethan filed a preliminary petition yesterday," Carlos said, pulling documents from his own folder. "He is requesting that a court evaluate your mental competency based on what he calls irrational behavior and erratic financial decisions. He has provided sworn statements from several witnesses who were present at the wedding." "Sworn statements?" I asked, feeling the anger begin to replace the shock. "What kind of statements?" Carlos consulted his papers before answering. "Statements describing your unjustified emotional outburst against an innocent young couple. Statements characterizing your financial decisions as vengeful and destructive. Statements suggesting that you have lost the ability to make rational decisions." Lucy squeezed my hand tighter. "Aunt Aurora, they've convinced several wedding guests to sign declarations. Most of them don't really understand what was going on that night. They just saw an old woman attacking newlyweds." Her voice contained all the frustration of someone who had seen the truth but felt powerless to make it prevail. "But we have good news, too." Joseph intervened with a smile that contrasted dramatically with the gravity of the situation. "It turns out there are more people on your side than they imagine." He took out his own cell phone and showed me a screen that left me stunned. "Joseph, what is this?" I asked, looking at what appeared to be a social media video with thousands of views. "Aurora, remember that several guests were recording that night? Well, some of those videos have gone viral. People aren't seeing a senile old woman attacking an innocent couple. They are seeing a dignified woman revealing the truth about years of abuse and manipulation." Amelia leaned in to look at the phone, too. "Aurora, the comments on these videos are overwhelmingly in your favor. People are praising your courage, your dignity under pressure, your decision to set boundaries. Some are sharing their own stories of family abuse. You've become a symbol of resistance against the exploitation of seniors." Carlos nodded in approval. "This public response will be invaluable if the case goes to court. It's difficult to argue that someone is mentally incompetent when thousands of people are applauding the logic and justice of their actions." His professional smile had returned, suggesting that perhaps the legal battle wouldn't be as one-sided as I had initially feared. "But there's something else you need to know," I said, making a decision I had been considering for the last 3 days. "If Ethan and Juliet want to play this game, if they want to turn this into a public legal battle, then they are going to discover exactly who they are messing with." I stood up and walked to my desk where I had been preparing my own folder of documents. For these 3 days, I have been in contact with several lawyers specializing in elder abuse. I have been documenting everything. The intimidating visits, the implicit threats, the conspiracy to strip me of my property, even the slap Juliet gave me. I took out photographs of my swollen cheek taken immediately after the wedding. Medical evidence of the physical assault. If they want war, I continued with a determination I hadn't felt in decades, they will have war. But it will be a war fought on my terms, with my resources, and with the truth on my side. Furthermore, I added with a smile that surprised even myself, I have decided to do something I should have done years ago. I am going to tell my full story publicly. I am going to show the world exactly what happens when greed is disguised as family love. The room filled with a new energy. The energy of people who knew that justice was on their side and that they had the resources to make it prevail. 6 months after that night that divided my life into a before and an after, I found myself sitting in the most important television studio in the city, waiting for the interview to begin that would tell my full story to the entire country. The program, Stories of a Lifetime, had contacted Carlos after the wedding videos had accumulated more than 2 million views on social media. My story had become a national symbol of resistance against family abuse of seniors. The journalist, Catherine Diaz, a woman respected for her professional integrity, reviewed her notes while the technicians made the final lighting adjustments. "Mrs. Hughes," she said to me with a warm smile, "I want you to know that you have inspired thousands of people with your courage. We have received hundreds of letters from viewers who have lived through similar situations during these 6 months. Many things had changed. The legal case Ethan and Juliet tried to build against me collapsed spectacularly when Carlos presented evidence of their conspiracy to declare me incompetent. Not only did they lose the case, but they were fined for legal frivolity and ordered to pay my attorney fees, which amounted to $45,000. The bankruptcy that followed was swift and devastating. Ethan had lost his job when his employer found out about the public scandal. Juliet had tried to start an image consulting business, but the viral videos had ruined her professional reputation. They were now living in a one-bedroom apartment in the suburbs, working part-time jobs and struggling to pay their accumulated debts. "We are on the air in 5 minutes," the program director announced. I looked at the cameras that would soon broadcast my story to millions of homes, feeling a mix of nervousness and determination. At my side was Carlos, who had agreed to appear with me to explain the legal aspects of the case. In the audience were Joseph, Lucy, and Amelia, my pillars of support during these difficult months. The most painful thing about these 6 months had been Ethan's complete silence. After losing the legal case, he had made no attempt to contact me. There were no calls asking for forgiveness, no letters explaining his behavior, no acknowledgement that his actions had been wrong. It was as if he had decided that it was easier to hate me than to face the reality of what he had done. Juliet, on the other hand, had tried to contact me several times. Her messages had evolved from legal threats to desperate pleas for financial help. The last message received just 2 weeks earlier said, "Aurora, I know we made mistakes, but we are family. Ethan is sick with stress and I'm pregnant. Please, you can't let your grandchild grow up in poverty." The news of the pregnancy had been like a dagger to my heart. I was going to be a grandmother, but my grandchild would grow up in a home filled with resentment toward me. However, I had learned the most difficult lesson of my life. I couldn't save people who didn't want to be saved. Trying to do so only perpetuated their destructive behavior. "Mrs. Hughes, we'll start in 30 seconds, Catherine informed me. I took a deep breath and thought of all the people who had written to me after seeing the videos, telling me their own stories of family abuse. Seniors whose children had taken control of their finances. Parents emotionally blackmailed by irresponsible adult children. Grandparents threatened with not seeing their grandchildren if they didn't provide financial support. We are live in 3, 2, 1. The red light on the camera came on and Catherine began with an introduction she had rehearsed perfectly. "Good evening and welcome to Stories of a Lifetime. I am Catherine Diaz and tonight we have with us Aurora Hughes, a 68-year-old woman whose story has shocked the nation and put the issue of family abuse against seniors at the center of a national debate." "Mrs. Hughes," Catherine continued, turning to me, 6 months after the events at your son's wedding, how does it feel to know that your story has inspired so many people?" Her question was direct but compassionate, allowing me to start on my own terms. "I feel grateful," I replied, feeling my voice stabilize as I spoke. "Grateful that something as painful as the loss of my relationship with my son has served to help other people in similar situations. For months, I felt lonely and confused, wondering if I was the one who was wrong. Now I know that what I went through is more common than any of us would like to admit." Catherine nodded and consulted her notes. "Tell us about the years leading up to that night when you started to realize that something wasn't right in your relationship with your son and his fiancée." It was the question I had been waiting for. The opportunity to explain how emotional and financial abuse develops gradually, almost imperceptibly. "It started with small things," I explained. Remembering those early signs I had ignored out of love, comments about my age, suggestions that I could no longer take care of myself, subtle pressures for me to make decisions that truly benefited them. Family abuse rarely begins with blows or shouting. It begins with the slow erosion of your self-confidence, with making you question your own reality. Carlos leaned forward to add legal context. "What Aurora describes is a classic pattern we see in elder abuse cases. The perpetrators, especially when they are family members, use psychological manipulation tactics before proceeding to more direct forms of coercion. It's insidious because it's disguised as loving concern." "And the moment of the revelation," Catherine asked, "when did you decide to expose the truth about your financial situation?" It was the question I knew would come, the one that required me to explain the most difficult decision of my life. The slap, I replied simply, when Juliet slapped me in the middle of the ballroom in front of 130 people for refusing to hand over the keys to my apartment. I knew she had crossed a line I couldn't ignore. In that moment, I understood that it was no longer about protecting my family from the consequences of their actions. It was about protecting myself from continuing to be abused. The interview continued for 45 minutes, covering all aspects of my story. I talked about the decision to live simply to protect my privacy, about the years of secret financial support I had provided, about the conspiracy to declare me incompetent, and about the legal battle that followed. Each answer was designed not only to tell my story, but to educate others about the warning signs and available resources. "Mrs. Hughes," Catherine said near the end of the program. "Do you have a message for your son if he is watching this interview tonight?" It was the most difficult question, the one I had been both dreading and hoping for. I looked directly into the camera, knowing there was a chance Ethan was watching. "Ethan, if you are listening to this, I want you to know that I still love you. I will always love you because you are my son. But loving someone doesn't mean allowing them to abuse you. Loving someone doesn't mean sacrificing your dignity for their convenience. Loving someone doesn't mean becoming a victim of their greed. The doors to my heart will always be open for you," I continued, feeling tears begin to well up in my eyes. "But only if you can walk through them as the honorable man I tried to raise you to be. Only if you can look me in the eye and accept full responsibility for your actions. Only if you can show that you have learned that family is built on love and respect, not on opportunism and manipulation." And for all the people watching this who recognize their own story in mine, I added, addressing the broader audience, "I want you to know that you have the right to be treated with dignity, no matter your age. You have the right to make your own decisions about your money, your home, your life. You have the right to set boundaries with family members who treat you badly. And you have the right to seek help when those boundaries are violated." When the cameras turned off, the studio erupted in applause from the production crew. Catherine hugged me with tears in her eyes. "Aurora, that was one of the most powerful interviews I have ever done. It's going to change lives." Carlos nodded proudly, knowing we had achieved something bigger than winning a legal case. That night, as I drove back to my apartment with Joseph, Lucy, and Amelia, I felt more at peace than I had been in years. I had told my story. I had defended my truth. And I had used my pain to help others. No matter what the future held with Ethan, I knew I had done the right thing. "Aurora," Lucy said from the back seat, "I am so proud of you. You have turned the worst experience of your life into something that will protect thousands of people." Her words resonated in my heart as we arrived home. The apartment that Juliet had once coveted now truly felt like a home again. Not because I had won a legal battle, but because I had finally learned to value myself enough to demand the respect I deserved. I had discovered that sometimes the only way to save a relationship is to be willing to lose it. And as I prepared for bed that night, I knew I had set the most important example of my life. That it's never too late to stand up for yourself. That you are never too old to demand dignity, and that true love sometimes requires the most difficult decisions. My story had ended, but my life was just beginning again. 2 years have passed since that night that divided my life into a before and an after. As I write these lines, I am sitting on the same balcony where I used to water my plants and reflect on the silent humiliations I thought I had to endure out of a mother's love. How different the world looks when you finally find the courage to put a price on your dignity. The morning began like all of them have for the last 18 months with a call from Carmen, the coordinator of the Aurora Hughes Foundation for the Protection of Seniors. Yes, I decided to use my name for the charitable organization I founded with part of my redirected inheritance. "Aurora, we have 23 new cases this week," Carmen informed me with that mixture of sadness and determination that characterizes those of us who work in this field. All similar patterns. Adult children pressuring older parents for property or money. Every case that comes across my desk is like looking into a mirror of the past. Yesterday, I reviewed the file of a 72-year-old woman whose daughter convinced her to sell her house for her own good, only to discover that the money financed a failed business and a vacation in Europe. The day before yesterday, it was a 69-year-old man whose twins emotionally blackmailed him. "If you don't lend us $50,000, you will never see your grandchildren again." The irony is not lost on me. I have turned my worst personal experience into my most meaningful life purpose. The foundation has helped more than 400 seniors regain control over their finances, their properties, and most importantly, their self-esteem. We have specialized lawyers, social workers, psychologists, and a support system that I wish I had had when I felt so lonely and confused. Joseph is still my dearest neighbor, although he is now also my foundation's vice president. His 72 years are filled with a renewed energy since he started giving lectures on how to detect family manipulation. "Aurora," he told me last week as we were reviewing cases, "I never thought my golden years would include becoming a detective for dysfunctional families, but it's the best adventure I've ever had." Lucy moved into the apartment next door a year ago. After her divorce from a marriage that had lasted only 8 months, she decided she needed to be close to the bravest person she knows. Working as the Foundation's educational director has given her a purpose she never found in her career as a traditional teacher. "Aunt Aurora," she tells me frequently, "you taught me that sometimes real family doesn't come from blood, but from those who choose to respect you unconditionally." The success of my public story has brought unexpected consequences. The book I wrote with the help of an investigative journalist became a national bestseller. When Love Hurts, An Elderly Woman Fights Back, has sold more than 200,000 copies. And all the royalties go directly to the foundation. The letters I receive from readers are living testimonies that my experience resonated in thousands of homes where silence had been the norm. Carlos is still my financial advisor, but now he is also the Foundation's principal accountant. His experience in handling the legal aspects of my confrontation with Ethan has become an invaluable asset in helping others in similar situations. "Mrs. Hughes," he told me during our monthly meeting, "we have recovered more than $3 million in properties and savings that abusive family members had illegally obtained." The question everyone asks me, the one that comes up in every interview and every deep conversation, is if I miss Ethan. The answer is complex and painful. I miss the child he was, the young man who had shown flashes of kindness and honor. I miss the illusion of the family I thought we had, but I don't miss the last few years of manipulation, emotional blackmail, and systematic disrespect. Ethan tried to contact me exactly 3 times during these 2 years. The first was 6 months after the television interview, when apparently some co-workers had seen the show and started treating him differently. The second was when his son, my grandson Oliver, was born 14 months ago. The third was 3 months ago when Juliet left him, taking the baby and half of their meager possessions. Each time he called, it was to ask for financial help, never to offer a genuine apology or acknowledge the harm he had caused. His pattern of thought remains identical. He sees his problems as external injustices, not as consequences of his decisions. The last conversation lasted less than 5 minutes and ended when he said, "Mom, your pride is more important than your grandson." I replied with a clarity that surprised me. "Ethan, my dignity is exactly as important as my grandson, and I hope that one day he learns that lesson better than you did." It was the first time I had ever hung up the phone on my son. And it was also strangely liberating. The topic of Oliver, my grandson, is the only one that can still make me cry. He is 14 months old and does not know me. When Juliet left, she took all the family photographs, including the few I had of him. I have created a trust fund for his college education administered by Carlos, that will be available when he turns 18, regardless of the relationship we have by then. Maybe, Amelia tells me during our weekly dinners, when Oliver is older, he will seek his own answers about what happened in his family. Maybe he will find the courage to get to know his grandmother for himself. Amelia has become my closest confidant, especially since she also had to set difficult boundaries with toxic family members a decade ago. What surprises me most about these 2 years is how much my physical and mental health have improved. During the last few years with Ethan and Juliet, I had developed chronic insomnia, constant headaches, and an anxiety that kept me in a state of permanent alert. My doctor says my current tests show the stress levels of a woman 10 years younger. "Aurora," Dr. Hernandez told me during my last checkup, it's impressive how the body responds when we eliminate sources of toxic stress. Your blood pressure is perfect. Your sleep is restorative. Even your posture has improved. He's right. I walk more upright. My voice sounds firmer and my hands no longer tremble when I make important decisions. The flower shop where I worked closed a year ago, but I found a new passion in the community garden I helped establish in the building. I teach other older residents about medicinal plants and organic growing techniques. It's an activity that connects me with the earth and with people who appreciate accumulated wisdom instead of seeing it as obsolescence. My current routine includes 3 days a week at the foundation offices, 2 days visiting the homes of seniors who need emotional support, and weekends dedicated to writing my second book. This one will focus on practical strategies for detecting and preventing family financial abuse based on the cases we have handled. The apartment that was once a source of greed is now a space of peace and creativity. I have converted Ethan's old room into an office where I receive people who need guidance. The walls are filled with thank you letters, photos of families we have helped reconcile in a healthy way, and diplomas from the universities where I have given lectures. One of the most rewarding experiences of this period has been becoming a mentor to other older women who are facing similar situations. Margaret, 74 years old, came to the foundation 6 months ago after her son sold her car without permission to pay off gambling debts. We worked together for 3 months and last week she sent me a photo of her smiling in her new car which she bought with her own savings after recovering the money legally. Aurora Margaret wrote to me in her letter. You taught me that setting boundaries is not cruelty, it's survival. You taught me that self-love is not selfishness, it's a necessity. You taught me that it's never too late to stand up for yourself. Her words reminded me why all this pain was worth it. Reflecting on these 2 years, I understand that my story does not have the traditional happy ending where the whole family reconciles and we live happily ever after. But it has something better. It has authenticity, reclaimed dignity, and a purpose that transcends my personal pain. I have learned that sometimes the greatest demonstration of self-love is to walk away from those who insist on hurting you. If I could send a message to the past, to the Aurora who walked into that wedding ballroom 2 years ago, I would say to her, have courage. What is about to happen will be painful. But on the other side awaits a life more authentic than you ever imagined possible. Peace awaits you. The peace that comes from knowing you will never again allow anyone to treat you as if you are disposable. Tonight, as I finish writing these reflections, I look toward the future with renewed hope. Tomorrow, I have a meeting with senators to discuss new legislation to better protect seniors from family abuse. Next week, I am inaugurating the Foundation's 3rd Regional Center. Next month, I will begin a documentary series on this topic that will be broadcast nationally. My life at 70 is richer, more meaningful, and more authentic than it was at 68. I have learned that the end of a toxic relationship is not a loss, it's a liberation. I have discovered that true family is chosen as much as it is inherited. And I have proven that it is never too late to write a new chapter in your own story. When people ask me if I regret what I did that night, my answer is always the same. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.